So welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we have something slightly special because there's 6 or 7, I can't count, us sitting on the same table.
8.
This is really rare. So the PnP Core team is at the MVP Summit in Redmond, and there's 7 of us actually sitting on the same table. So it's me, my name is Vesa Juvonen, I'm a Senior Program Manager in SharePoint Engineering. With me here is Waldek Mastergaard, Erwin van Hunen, Patrick Rogers, Elias Strutz, I can't pronounce Elias' last name properly, Bert Janssen, and Paolo Pialorsi. And what we're planning to do is just a random discussion on the future of SharePoint development and everything related on that one. And even though we start with wanted to talk about SharePoint development and development in general, let's actually start with PnP PowerShell. And the father of PnP PowerShell, who's Erwin van Hunen.
The father. It makes me feel very old.
Yes,
thank
but
you.
you are.
Yeah. Well,
Compliments first.
thank you for that too. Yeah.
But now, Erwin, for whenever we introduced PowerShell, that was actually in SharePoint 2010, wasn't it? It was,
right,
actually.
Yeah,
that's a while back.
Yeah.
At the time, we were already kind of saying that that's an evil plan of teaching IT pros to do development. And has it actually paid off? And what's the really value of the PnP PowerShell? And what's your direction of the future?
Right. So maybe I can explain a bit why I started with the PnP PowerShell commandlets, because they come from a background where I noticed that during my day-to-day development tasks, I wanted to do simple, short code snippets, and I always ended up writing console applications to do that, and it felt awkward, especially if you had to make a little change or whatever. So I was like, okay, can I use PowerShell? But in Office 365 there was no sane PowerShell solution that you could do like development type of tasks with. So I started to look into, could I expose the whole CSOM object model to PowerShell? And you can, by using all kinds of complex scripting things, you can expose the whole CSOM object model. But it didn't feel natural, especially if you used PowerShell commandlets before. They had to be more PowerShell-y, if you want to use that word. So that's where the PnP commandlets came from. They are a more PowerShell-based approach, or the commandlets have a more PowerShell nature than using CSOM directly. And that's also where I see where they make a lot of sense, and especially for me at least, is that in my day-to-day development tasks, I use the PnP commandlets as an addition to my development tasks to check out if my code did the right thing, is that artifact created, or maybe I want to make a little change. That's where I use the PowerShell commandlets for.
Yep. Makes absolute sense.
Yeah, but then of course there's the IT Pro side of the story, where the SharePoint PowerShell commandlets in 2010 and 2013, 2016 basically are for. They also make sense in the case of Office 365 to use the PnP ones, because the Office 365 management shell doesn't do anything with artifacts. It just
actual content of
just administration tasks, creating sites, adding users, groups, etc. Where the PnP ones are, they go a bit further. They focus mainly on artifacts, creating lists, items in lists, content types, etc., etc., etc. So they're an addition to what you already have there, and for me, I think of them as a great additional tool set as a developer.
Yeah. So, and related on the PnP PowerShell, just kind of a follow-up on that one, quite often people are asking, why wouldn't we combine the native SharePoint Online admin PowerShell and the PnP PowerShell? That's a classic question. Yeah,
well, I've been thinking about that too, to be honest.
Excellent feedback.
Great question, yeah. The thing is, of course, this is open source. I would say that typically we can react faster on changes than, Microsoft can, which is, I think, a great benefit of the PnP commandlets. I mean, we release them every month, a new version, with fixes, updates, additions, etc. So pretty recently we added now the commandlets for the graph, written by Paolo.
Super cool stuff.
Yeah. So it makes sense. There was we made a mistake when we released the PnP PowerShell commandlets, that we used an prefix that was overlapping with the Microsoft one. So we used the SPO prefix. Now we'll fix that in the upcoming release. We renamed the commandlets to use the PnP prefix. So there's no conflict anymore. You can easily use them side by side. So,
And I think actually I like that the thinking of the PnP being much more agile. We can actually do stuff. And I'm from SharePoint engineering, and I know that our processes are not as flexible as the PnP process. So that kind of makes sense. And why not have them as two separate ones, so we can version them differently and release new versions differently as well.
Yep.
There's always a different focus.
True.
Engineering ones, the Microsoft ones are for administrators.
Yeah.
These are for content managers, developers.
True.
Correct.
So a big difference.
Yep.
Sure.
And the community can contribute directly in the PnP PowerShell cmdlet. Instead, the PowerShell cmdlet made by Microsoft are made just by Microsoft.
No,
So,
exactly.
Sure.
There you have to request a feature, and if you're lucky, that feature will be implemented. And with the PnP, you can just build
much
it
more
yourself.
open, yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Let's move on a slightly different topic. So that was the PnP PowerShell. So let's talk about slightly the PnP Provisioning Engine, and let's actually start the discussion with Bert. Bert Janssen is one of the main architects of the provisioning engine as well. And what would be your thinking on the future of the PnP Provisioning Engine, related on the discussions, for example, what we had earlier today with engineering? So does the PnP Provisioning Engine, does it have a future? And is it something worthwhile of investing from a customer perspective?
First of all, I would like to I'd say that Paolo, Vesa, and Erwin also were like the fathers as well of the
Okay, I start to
engine.
want to know how many children I have.
We have many
Yes,
children.
so there's many children. Yeah. No, but the provisioning engine is really became one of the more popular elements in PnP. We have think we're about to reach 1,000 tenants a month using the engine to create site collections. Sorry, to create sites, provision sites inside their tenancies. So which means it is very popular. There's a clear demand on the engine because people just want to create custom sites. Out of the box sites are okay, but not sufficient for all the scenarios that customers have. Now with Microsoft, SharePoint Online sites are evolving as well. So we'll use the plain team site and the STS site we've been using for many, many years. But there's a new guy on the block, it's the group site, which behaves slightly different, but that will become an important site for the future. And with
group sites, you mean the modern team site?
Yeah. Yes. So sites you can create a group using the Outlook experience. From SharePoint perspective, it's called a modern team site.
Yep.
But essentially, it's the site linked to a group in Exchange, and that site is becoming more and more popular and being pushed more by engineering as the default site to use, which essentially also means that from the PnP side, we will work on the engine side to make it compatible with those sites.
Yeah.
So if in the future your default site will be a group site, you can still use the engine to customize it, because this still is a SharePoint site. It looks slightly different. It has a modern look, but still is under the hood. It's SharePoint, meaning you can still customize it. There are some gotchas, some things which are not possible, but overall it can be customizable, and that's what we will add in the engine in the upcoming periods.
Yeah, and obviously sooner or later, right now the engineering is looking for PnP engine as a innovation and inspiration for their native, let's say, provisioning engine as well. But that's not really in a short time frame. So that's going to still take a while for engineering to come back with, and especially on the level of the PnP provisioning engine, which has a lot of different capabilities available already today. So obviously that will have a valid future within a year easily, and we'll see even further than that.
And longer. The PnP engine really goes really wide and in depth, which native implementation would probably take some time to catch up to that level.
Yep, no doubt. Okay, moving on the following person on the table, and this is really fun that we're all sitting on the same table. So we have Paolo on the table. Paolo been working on the PowerShell and the engine and the PnP stuff in general. But one of the things what Paolo has also worked quite heavily is the Microsoft Graph. What about SharePoint and the Microsoft Graph? What's your take on some of the generic messaging that all of the future APIs will come through Graph? When would be the Microsoft APIs coming through the Graph, or what's your take on that?
Well, of course, the Microsoft Graph, in my opinion at least, and not only my opinion, is really fundamental for any new custom development you want to make on top of Office 365. And the biggest value I see in the Microsoft Graph is that you don't focus your attention on just one of the services as it was, for example, for the SharePoint APIs and the REST APIs of SharePoint, or for the SharePoint add-in. But more in general, whenever you want to build something on top of Office 365, you have the entire ecosystem of services for you, ready to serve you and to provide you functionalities. So I'm really happy to see that now in the preview endpoint, in the beta endpoint of the Microsoft Graph, we also have few endpoints for SharePoint Online as well, to manage lists, items, and sites. And I'm looking forward to see much more endpoints available. Most likely, we will not be able to see all the REST APIs that are right now available in SharePoint somehow wrapped or migrated into the Microsoft Graph, because it's not that easy to do that.
Yeah.
But on the other side, what will be really useful to create real business solutions will be there, in my opinion. It will be a step-by-step route. And that's why we started in PnP to provide some new cmdlet also for the Microsoft Graph, as Erwin said a few minutes ago, because we think that we need to properly provide support to developers and to IT pro guys to play with the graph as well. And so there is a nice future behind us.
Yeah, no doubt.
I have a question about that. Do you see that the graph will provide APIs for customization?
For customization of what?
Of artifacts. Basically everything that we do nowadays through CSM or the REST API of SharePoint. Do you see that happening in the Graph API too? That we could create lists, create content types, those things?
Could be. But I think it will not be comparable to what we can do right now with CSM and with the provisioning engine. And that's my opinion again. I think it will never happen that we will have a full coverage of all of the capabilities that right now we provide with the engine, also through the Microsoft Graph.
Right.
Because it's not needed to be fair. We already have the provisioning engine. There will be the provisioning engine coming from the product group, so there's no need for that, in my opinion.
Yep.
And there's so many APIs in the REST and CSM endpoint as well, so exposing them in the Graph API is not worthwhile of the investment.
And those APIs are still fully supported. There's
and they're fully
nothing wrong
supported.
with using those
exactly.
APIs. So
Exactly.
meaning it's perfectly valid to use.
Yeah, and I guess that there's also another edge, right? Because the shape of sites, for example, changes a lot. Or like in the past, we could add web parts to list views, right? And we move more and more away from that. And I think that what we will see is that APIs align more with the future, so align more around scenarios, what you can do and achieve, so create documents or move a document and not really manage a web part on a page. Perhaps that won't be the first scenario that we will see in a graph.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. Yes.
Yeah, totally agree.
It's more on the business scenarios and functionalities what we want to expose in the Graph, like it is already with Graph and other areas of Graph.
It's a tool set to create business solutions,
yes,
and not to customize a site.
Yeah.
Yes, and actually in a way that they span services and not just one silo like email or calendar or a group.
Yeah,
absolutely makes sense. Cool. Moving along on the different topics and different people. Let's start with the Elio. And I can't pronounce his last name properly. I need to learn this.
Try?
Well, can you try it?
Strive.
Perfect.
There you go.
There we
So
go.
easy.
Even Wally can do it.
Oh, wow. I'm not really sure if that was a compliment.
Cool. So let's talk about the SharePoint framework. And Elio has been one of the guys who've been sharing his knowledge around the SharePoint framework as part of the developer preview, which is now available. So SharePoint framework is available in the developer tenants pretty soon, in the first release tenants as well. One of the things what people keep on asking around the SharePoint framework is let's say the knowledge gap of learning how to do modern web stack development and TypeScript. And Elio has been doing that for quite a long time, actually already before we released the SharePoint framework. So how did you learn to do the modern way of doing development in the web stack, using the web stack development model?
So I started with the beginning. So what is coming in SharePoint Framework, like TypeScript. I started learning what's TypeScript, how can you use TypeScript. I don't start with learning everything at once because that's too hard. Yeah. So if you're checking out SharePoint Framework, you have React, you have NPM, Node, and all these kind of things. If you're going to do everything at once, it will be too much information to capture. So start one by one. So if you want to learn SharePoint Framework, start with TypeScript and then move on a step ahead. So TypeScript is the first thing you need to learn. React could be your second option, or Angular or something else, but don't do everything at once. So.
Yeah. And that's a great guidance from a learning perspective. And Ilya, in your case, you've been using this kind of a web stack development also before, right? Even in the on-premises deployments. Yeah. So how did you decide to go that route a while back?
Yeah, I think a lot of developers did this in the past. So in SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013, we all put some web parts on the page and linked scripts or linked something, an HTML page to it. Yeah. And then it was a web part. But there was no development story around it. So the great thing about the SharePoint framework is that you now have a development story which you can now publish your new web parts or whatever is coming with it. And before, everyone has its own ways of doing that. I saw a couple of ways about using a custom action, injecting a JavaScript file into the page or the web part itself. Or there were some very fancy things people were doing.
Yeah.
So we kind of industrialized that approach. With the SPFX.
Yeah. And the SPFX is obviously offering a lot of services for you to consume as well. So you don't have to worry about certain things. You get a preloaded data, you get a lot of APIs available for you to consume, which is really great as well. Good. Moving along on things, so we get the things, or moving along across the people. So we switch between the people and discussion points. So Patrick Rogers on the table as well. Patrick is one of the fathers of PnP JavaScript Core.
Captain Rogers.
Captain Rogers. And maybe we should actually rename the PnP JS Core with something more funkier, because PnP JS Core isn't a great name like React or Angular or Mustache or whatever.
Yeah. JavaScript frameworks all have like a
cool they always have a cool name. We should probably rethink that as well. But
it's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
That might be our
Chai.
hurdle.
Oh, we already have, Chai. We have that already. Karma.
But now, considering the PnP JS Core, what's the relationship of that one with SharePoint Framework, and what's the future of PnP JS Core?
So the relationship actually started out, Vesa and myself, and actually I think everybody at the table was part of sort of getting to see an early look at the upcoming SharePoint framework. And we looked kind of all at ourselves and thought, well, Patterns and Practice program really doesn't have sort of a formal story around client-side development or anything with the modern web development stack. So we thought, well, we should really do something there, but we were in a position where we couldn't announce to the world what was coming because it was still under development. It was still, sort of a Microsoft internal thing at that point. So we started a series of meetings. There was weekly meetings, and we started encouraging the use of TypeScript and introducing these technologies such as Gulp, React, things like that a lot of classic SharePoint developers who'd done some very advanced development in the past perhaps weren't familiar with or hadn't used before. I know myself, I had to do a fair amount of learning very quickly to get up to speed on these things, and so I kind of came from where classic SharePoint developers were coming from. So we started this program, and as part of that, we also had the idea of the CSOM core, the managed code core libraries that folks have been using for a couple years now, were very successful and really helped the community do a lot of powerful development without having to necessarily rewrite this kind of same boilerplate code again and again. So in parallel with this idea of educating folks about what was coming without being able to tell them what was coming, we started this idea of we should also have sort of a core library to help folks. Now as I can think about it, it's coming up with a better name, but this core library to sort of follow what the CSOM core idea of a reusable library that folks can use. And that's where that came from. And how it relates to SharePoint Framework is sort of that origin, but then you can certainly consume and use the library within your SharePoint Framework projects, and we very much hope you do, but it's certainly not required. The SharePoint Framework itself provides a lot of great support, great HTTP client support and things like that. The disadvantage of that is you have to remember all the URLs, you have to parse a lot of the data, and so again, it's something we're hoping is just very helpful and helps folks concentrate more on what they want to do and less on exactly how the REST APIs work under the hood. Yeah. Especially GET requests, obviously in REST folks are familiar with. It's very simple, but a lot of the post requests, updating things, stuff like that can really be a little bit more complicated. So it really came down with this idea of simplifying the developer story around focusing on what you want to do and less on how exactly to do it. We're all very familiar with like the GET request. That's very simple to pull data out of SharePoint, but less familiar, or it's a little more difficult with the post requests, the various updates and the ways to create things and then update various things. So sort of bottling that functionality up, providing a nice clean API, and let folks just do what they need to do. We've also wrapped up a lot of common functionality like batching and caching and things like that folks can obviously write themselves, but we're hoping just makes it a little bit easier, especially if you've ever tried to work with the batching functionality. We think inside the API we've written to kind of wrap all that makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier. And we've actually we've got enhancements in the next release, which will probably be out next week from whenever we're recording this, to really help with batching additionally as well. So another big point of the JavaScript library is to sort of really engage with the community around this modern development story. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback, both on the educational side and on the library side. And I've talked a bunch, so I'll stop talking.
No, that's good. That was a really great story around the reasoning. And one of the things to be fair to remember also is that the JS Core is also available for on-premises, and it works already today in SharePoint Online, so you can actually take advantage out of it.
SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2016 and 2013 on-premises are all supported very well, and if you do find issues, of course, please do report them, and we're looking to address that stuff as quickly as we can.
Yeah, sounds really good. What about Waldek and Elio? Have you guys had a look on the JS Core? What's your take on it?
Yeah, so I actually gave it a try in the context of a web part, a client-side web part, and I love it. I love the way it works. And if you compare the code, I've built actually a sample that illustrates performing CRUD operations in SharePoint with REST, raw REST, and compare it with the library. And you can really easily see significant improvement in simplicity of the code, like how easily you can write that. And in a way, I think you could compare it to TypeScript. The same way TypeScript offers you design time features to check your code, the same way with the PnP JS Core library, you get exactly the same with interaction with lists, libraries, and items and sites. So all of the objects that you have in your sites, right? You get all of the checks design time, as opposite to if you would use raw REST, that you will get errors on runtime, and there's no way for you to check that up front as part of your test suites, other than to execute really complex tests.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
that's a really good point, no doubt. What about you, Elio? Did you have a chance to?
Yeah, I used it for some CRUD operations in small applications on Office 365 or SharePoint Online. So I think it was a couple of months ago that I started using it, and I immediately saw the value in it. You only need to write a couple of lines of code instead of 30 or 50 lines to do some CRUD operations.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks ago, I also did a pull request to support or add the support for webhooks in SharePoint Online. So,
so it's nicely evolving as well. There's a lot of goodies on that one, not just about accessing the list data. Adding a webhook to the site using JavaScript, that's pretty cool as well.
Cool. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have ideas, let us know.
Yes, no doubt.
Call us at 0900.
Yes. 555 Patrick. Yeah.
Cool. So somebody's going to do that.
Yeah, please don't call me.
So, and let's move still to Waldeck. So we haven't actually talked with Waldeck, or we haven't started the discussion with Waldeck yet. So Waldeck obviously has been doing a lot of SharePoint framework work, SharePoint framework stuff with us, and we'll be doing that in the future as well. What's your take on the classic statement on people are getting kind of scared? Is all of the development in SharePoint only in JavaScript now? So only client-side development? Does it mean that all of the classic server-side stuff is going to go away? What about on-premises? What about Azure web APIs? And what does this mean? Why are we pushing JavaScript?
So I guess that you see a trend developing that in the past, if you look at, for example, most 2007, the recommended practice was to integrate as much as you could with SharePoint. So everything you would build, we would build timer jobs, we would build workflows, we would build event receivers, we would try to stuff as many of our custom stuff in the farm, because that was the way to go, because that went even as far as to have a database, right? And the basic point behind it was that the more you integrate, the more you can ensure that it will follow the same upgrade path as the product, that it will go along within the backups, that it will be just one big family.
Yep.
And after a few years, it wasn't.
Yep.
So we learned a lot. All of us learned a lot. And based on that, we came to a new point that actually it's not that bad idea to split the everything that we do in two, right? So on one hand, there is the client side where you show things. And then on the other hand, you have to have still the engine that does processing, business rules, and operation. And these can be really heavy processing, long-running operations. Yep. So things that you would never ever do in browser, because that might be closed, that might fail, that might break. So you want to be able to combine the power that the client offers you with terms of reactive responsive UI, and at the same time you want to be sure that everything that you build, the process are integer, right? So the data is correct, that does not break, that your workflows, process, and operations are run the way they are supposed to. So you actually see that things emerge like Flow, Power Apps, webhooks, that we more and more offload things from the platform, and actually things that we build are more complex in the way that we can run them or operate them more easily. What we will do is actually split in a half. You have the client that becomes more dynamic, and on the other hand, we have more and more need for complex processing, ensure that it runs, that it scales, that it supports the demands, the peaks that we have, that we can have in usage.
Yeah.
So I think that's the direction that we are going to.
So no doubt, obviously, the UI elements will switch on the client-side development also in on-premises, hopefully, because we want to do one customization which works in the SharePoint Online and in on-premises. The back-end systems,
absolutely,
you still need to have the skills of doing C#. Right?
Yes, or Node.js, Python, or Ruby, or PHP, or whatever you can.
PowerShell, because you can do Azure functions as an example.
Yes, and I think that's the a great point and a trend that you want to build things once and to be able to run them everywhere. Because if you choose to build things that work, for example, only on premises because you don't have any plan to go to the cloud today, you might have it tomorrow. And it would be a shame for you to choose an approach that will prevent you from going to the cloud, or actually choosing a hybrid approach. So actually the best what you can do is to choose an approach that will work everywhere, and I think that Microsoft does a great job trying to help us as much as they can to actually allow us to build this or to use the same approach everywhere, and to actually build solutions on our terms.
I think we're finally getting there. That's a promise of the future, or has been for years, right?
Yes.
So we're finally getting there, and whenever we get the modern team sites, the modern list experiences, the on-premises, and SharePoint 2016, that's going to help on that as well. So we will get a parity between the SharePoint Online and on-prem, even though online is evolving much faster anyway in the future as well.
So I guess that there's one more thing that we don't have in the script, and I guess that's a question to you.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
so that's not on a script, and I actually put you here on
Because everything
on the
has been
spot.
scripted. So
Yes, yes. Even though we had to wait like 10
It's a tight
minutes,
operation.
fool around to have someone with a card going on. But for the last is it 3 years already that you led PnP or lead PnP?
3 years.
2 years.
3
now.
years. Yeah,
How do
internally
you
we started 3 years.
experience that? Because it started from probably an idea or a need, and now evolved to a global program that consists of people from all over the world who try to do their best to help community out. How do you experience that, being in that role of the leader, if you will?
The master.
Yes,
The father.
the
father of the fathers.
I wouldn't call myself master or even the father.
Well, you actually are an MCM. There's proof of that, so you are a master.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, to be fair, it started with a really simple idea of why on earth are we banging our head against the wall all over again and again and again in the same projects across the world and same challenges. First internally in Microsoft services, and then quite soon external as well. Well, the growth has been a surprise of how well it has been actually growing, and it's great to see the interest of people sharing their knowledge between others. And at the moment, it's getting much more difficult to actually even keep up with all of the offers from a coordination perspective on people trying to help us. Which is then the following challenge of the whole program, no doubt. How do we deal with the existing or the growing interest of what people are actually having?
Yeah, and I guess that at some point you want to scale, right? Because there is more demand, more use. We see that, I think every other week or a month you share the numbers, like how the program and everything that the whole team built grows.
Sure.
And we only see that grow and grow more, right? So with that, you can imagine that the demand increases. There's more need for more features, more support, more questions. So do you have any plans around that? How to facilitate that growth?
I would say that the number one way to facilitate that growth is really to get the internal and external community more closer involved, delegate, make sure that we have a group of trusted people who can help us. That's really the easiest way to do that. Get more MVPs more closely involved, try to figure out a way how we can scale the coordination as well.
So if you could have one wish for the new year for the program, what would that be? And that would be the last thing that I'm going to ask you. So,
for me, I would say that internally in Microsoft we need to make slightly more investments on the initiative as well, because we're running out of time to coordinate. The MVPs are highly interested on getting more closely involved. There's internal organizations who want to be involved. So number one thing is actually grow the internal commitments from SharePoint engineering. Maybe scale us to be 3 persons who are leading the PnP. Well, in quotes leading, because we don't actually lead the initiative. Initiative leads itself, or together with community, but coordinate those actions so we can more easily scale. We'll see if we'll get there. If numbers keep on growing, I'm sure that the program will get more resources as well. So.
Cool.
I would have wished for a unicorn.
Well, unicorn would have been really nice as well. That's my Christmas gift.
Yeah.
Cool. But I think that sums up this one. We've been recording this in the middle of MVP Summits. There's quite a lot of background noise every now and then. There's people dropping by. John Liu just dropped on the table as well. So hopefully
you just dropped on the table.
On the table. But hopefully you find the discussion interesting. We didn't have any video, we didn't have any demos, but this was more around discussion across the table on the future of SharePoint customization. So we'll absolutely come up with a new webcast again sooner or later. Thanks for listening. And
bye.
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 You just got it. You just got it.
You have to say it.